I was half asleep when the first crash echoed through the hallway, a sound so violent it rattled the picture frames on my wall. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the second slam against my door jolted me upright. Before I could breathe, the wood splintered, and my stepfather, Victor, forced his way in. His face twisted with rage I had seen before, but never this raw. His eyes weren't just angry, they were hungry, wild, as if hurting me would quiet something inside him. I scrambled backward, clutching my blanket like a shield, though it was useless. The stench of alcohol rolled off him, suffocating the room. "You think you're smarter than me," he growled, spittle flying. And then, before I could speak, his fists came down, heavy and merciless. The pain wasn't just physical, it was betrayal carved into my skin. Every strike reminded me that my own home had become a prison, and I had no escape. I tried to scream, but his hand clamped over my mouth, smothering the sound. My body convulsed under his weight, and I felt the sharp sting of my lips splitting against my teeth. My vision blurred with tears and blood. Yet the worst part wasn't the blows. It was the silence from down the hall. My mother's bedroom door remained shut, as though she couldn't hear, as though I didn't exist. I clawed at Victor's arm, leaving scratches, but he only tightened his grip, sneering with victory. My heart raced with the realization that I might not survive the night. When he finally released me, it wasn't out of mercy. It was because he wanted me to see myself broken. He shoved me onto the floor like discarded trash, watching as I tried to crawl away, leaving smears of blood across the carpet. Every movement felt like dragging glass through my veins, but I kept pulling myself forward inch by inch toward the door. My hands trembled as I reached the hallway, the dim light making everything seem distant, unreal. I collapsed halfway, my chest heaving, whispering my mother's name like a prayer. My mind begged her to come, to save me, to finally see what I had endured all these years. For a moment, I truly believed she would appear, and then she did. My mother, Evelyn, appeared at the end of the hallway, her robe pulled tight around her, her face pale as if she had been caught in her own nightmare. For a heartbeat, hope surged inside me. "Mom," I croaked, tasting iron on my tongue, stretching my hand toward her. But instead of rushing forward, instead of shielding me, she let out a scream that didn't sound like love or fear for me. It was horror, pure and unfiltered. She screamed as though I were some monstrous sight, as though my bloodied body crawling toward her was too much to bear. Her eyes darted not at me, but at Victor standing behind, shadowed in the broken doorway, breathing heavily like a predator who had just finished feeding. That scream pierced deeper than Victor's fists. It wasn't the sound of a mother protecting her child, but of a woman terrified of the truth standing before her. I froze, my outstretched hand hanging in the air, trembling, desperate. She pressed her back against the wall, her fingers digging into the plaster as if she wanted to disappear into it. Victor stepped forward, and instead of accusing him, instead of demanding answers, her lips trembled as she whispered, "What did you do?" But the way she said it made it sound like I was the problem. My chest tightened with a new kind of pain, one that suffocated worse than broken ribs. She wasn't my savior. She was my witness, and she chose silence. I collapsed at her feet, the cold tiles chilling my skin as I tried to lift myself up again. "Please," I whispered, though I didn't know if I was asking her to help me or to finally see me. Blood dripped from my chin, leaving red stains against her slippers. For the first time, she touched me, not with tenderness, but with a shove, pushing me aside as though she couldn't bear to feel my body against hers. "Stop this, Aurora," she muttered, her voice sharp, trembling with denial. My vision swam, my ears ringing, but I heard Victor's footsteps echo behind us, slow and deliberate. He didn't even need to speak. The power he held over her was clear, and over me, he already owned my silence. The walls of the house felt closer, suffocating, as though they too were keeping secrets. The family portraits lining the hallway seemed to mock me, smiling faces of a time before him, when my father was still alive, when safety still existed. Now those frames were relics, reminders of what had been stolen. Evelyn gripped her robe tighter, avoiding my gaze, avoiding the blood soaking into the carpet. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't acknowledge what had just been done. I wanted to scream that I was her daughter, that I needed her, that she couldn't keep pretending. But the words caught in my throat, choked by fear and exhaustion. All I could do was stare at her, willing her to choose me, but she didn't. Victor crouched beside me, his hand gripping my hair, yanking my head back so I had no choice but to face him. His smirk widened as he whispered just loud enough for both of us to hear. "See? She doesn't want you either." My stomach churned, bile rising as his words coiled around my heart like a snake. I looked up at my mother, begging her to deny it, to shout that he was wrong, but she stayed frozen, trembling, eyes glassy. That silence was the final confirmation I never wanted. Victor released me, letting my head hit the floor with a thud that echoed in my skull. Darkness tugged at the edges of my vision, but I clung to consciousness, too afraid to leave myself unguarded. The last thing I remember before blacking out was my mother's hands covering her ears, as if blocking out the truth could erase it. Victor stood tall behind her, his shadow swallowing the hallway, a silent victor in a war I never chose to fight. My body ached, every bone screaming, but the deeper wound was invisible. My mother's refusal to save me. That night didn't just shatter my body, it fractured my soul. When the world went dark, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. And as much as I wanted to wake up from it, deep down, I feared I already knew the truth. This was only the beginning. I woke to the sound of my own breathing, shallow and ragged, as though my lungs were struggling against an invisible weight. The room around me was unfamiliar at first. Sterile white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, the steady beep of a monitor by my bedside. It took me a moment to understand. I was in a hospital. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache, every limb heavy with bruises, my lips swollen, and bandages covering cuts along my arms. I tried to sit up, but a stabbing pain shot through my ribs, forcing me back down. A nurse entered quietly, her eyes soft with pity, but when I asked where my mother was, she hesitated before answering. "She's outside." The pause in her voice said everything. I turned my head toward the window, but instead of sunlight bringing comfort, it felt cold, distant. My memories of the night before returned in sharp flashes. Victor's fists, my mother's scream, her silence, her refusal to shield me. I wanted to believe she was just in shock, that she needed time to process what had happened. But deep inside, the truth gnawed at me. She had chosen him. She had chosen her fear, her denial, over me. And now, lying here hooked to machines, I felt more abandoned than ever. The nurse gave me water, her kindness like a thread I held onto, but no amount of gentle care could stitch the hole in my chest. When my mother finally walked in, she looked composed, her hair neatly brushed, her robe replaced with a dress that tried to disguise the chaos of the night before. She carried herself like nothing had happened, like we were just another family dealing with an accident. She sat on the chair beside me, folding her hands tightly, her knuckles pale. "Aurora," she began, her tone firm, practiced, as though rehearsed. "You have to understand. Victor didn't mean to hurt you. He's been under a lot of stress." The words stabbed deeper than his blows. My throat tightened, my voice barely above a whisper. "He almost killed me." She flinched, but didn't respond, only lowering her gaze to the floor as if ashamed, but not enough to protect me. Her excuses came like poison wrapped in silk. "You know how your temper can be. Maybe you provoked him." My body shook, not from weakness but from rage. My temper? I was a child, a daughter begging for safety. And yet here she was, twisting the truth until it was unrecognizable, reshaping it to fit the narrative that kept her world intact. My vision blurred with tears, but I refused to cry in front of her. If she couldn't see my pain for what it was, then tears would only feed her denial. "You saw me, Mom," I whispered. "You saw what he did." She shook her head quickly, as if erasing the memory, as if rewriting reality was easier than facing it. Her silence told me everything. She would never choose me over him. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and sideways glances from hospital staff. I overheard fragments of their conversations when they thought I was asleep. "Child Protective Services?" one nurse whispered. "But the mother, she refuses to press charges." Each word felt like another nail sealing me inside a coffin of helplessness. I wanted to scream the truth to anyone who would listen, but every time I opened my mouth, my mother was there, spinning her lies, controlling the narrative. "She's exaggerating," she'd tell them. "It was an accident." Victor never came to visit, but his shadow loomed large, his absence almost louder than his presence. I knew why. He didn't need to show up. My mother was doing his work for him. One afternoon, a social worker visited my room, her voice gentle but probing, her eyes searching for cracks in the story I'd been forced to carry. "Aurora, you're safe here. You can tell me the truth." My lips parted. the words rising in my throat like a tide I could no longer contain. But then I saw my mother standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her gaze sharp and warning. The words died inside me. The social worker sighed, her expression heavy with unspoken understanding, as if she'd seen this dance of fear and silence 100 times before. She handed me her card discreetly, slipping it into my hand as she left, her touch lingering as if to say, "You're not alone, even if you feel like it." At night, I stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting across the sterile walls, and I wondered how I had ended up here, trapped between a man who broke my body and a mother who broke my spirit. I thought of my father, the man who had once carried me on his shoulders, who had laughed with me in the backyard, whose voice had always promised safety. He was gone now, taken years ago in a car accident, and with him had gone the last remnants of security I'd known. If he had been alive, none of this would have happened. Victor would never have set foot in our home. My mother would never have chosen him. The thought twisted inside me like a knife. My father's death had been the beginning of my downfall. The longer I stayed in the hospital, the clearer the divide between truth and lies became. Nurses looked at me with sympathy, but none dared challenge my mother's authority. The doctors treated my injuries, but not the wounds carved into my heart. My mother visited every day, bringing flowers, pretending to be the concerned parent, her performance flawless for anyone watching. Yet the moment we were alone, her mask slipped, and the cold truth seeped through. "Don't ruin this family, Aurora," she hissed once, her voice sharp as glass. "If you keep telling these stories, they'll take you away. Is that what you want?" My reply was silence, but inside I screamed, "Yes, take me away. Save me." On my 6th day, I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. The bruises, the bandages, the swollen face. It wasn't just pain staring back at me. It was a version of myself I barely recognized. I wasn't just the victim of Victor's rage. I was the casualty of my mother's denial. And I knew, deep down, that if I didn't find the strength to speak, to fight, I would disappear completely. Not in body, but in spirit. That realization ignited something small but fierce inside me. A flame that Victor hadn't extinguished. A flame my mother's silence couldn't smother. For the first time, I whispered to my reflection. A promise meant only for me. This isn't the end. Not for me. Returning home from the hospital felt like stepping into the mouth of a beast I knew too well. The walls seemed to lean closer, suffocating, as though they had absorbed every scream, every blow, every silence. My mother walked ahead of me, her steps brisk and purposeful, pretending as if this were any ordinary day, as if her daughter hadn't been broken within those very walls. I trailed behind her slowly, each step heavy with dread. I could smell Victor's cologne before I even saw him, that sharp, suffocating scent that made my stomach twist. He was sitting on the couch, remote in hand, like the king of a kingdom he ruled through fear. And when his eyes met mine, there was no apology, only arrogance. The first words he spoke to me when I walked in weren't words of remorse, but a mockery. "You look worse than the walls after I fixed them." He laughed, his teeth flashing like knives, and my mother laughed too, though it was nervous, forced, her eyes darting between us like a performer waiting for the audience's approval. I stood frozen, fists clenched at my sides, wanting to scream, to throw something, anything, to shatter the illusion he was trying to build. But my voice was gone, swallowed by the knowledge that I was alone in this battle. My mother wouldn't defend me, my father couldn't, and the world outside couldn't see what really went on here. The beast's mouth had closed, and I was trapped inside again. Later that night, I overheard them whispering in their room, their voices filtered through the thin walls, Victor's deep and commanding, my mother's soft and submissive. "She needs to learn respect," he said coldly. "If you don't keep her in line, she'll destroy everything." My mother's reply was muffled, but I caught fragments. "She's young, she's hurting," but her defense was weak, fragile, collapsing under the weight of his authority. I curled into my bed, hugging myself as though my arms could become armor. The truth became clearer with every word. In his eyes, I was not a child, not a daughter. I was a threat, an obstacle to his control. And in my mother's eyes, I was a responsibility she wished she could rewrite. I began noticing things I hadn't before. Locked drawers in the study. Papers quickly tucked away when I entered the room. Phone calls answered in hushed tones. Victor's voice shifting into false charm when he thought no one was listening. Something about the way he guarded those papers made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about violence or control. It was about secrets, the kind of secrets that made people dangerous. I remembered the social worker's card hidden in my bag, and for the first time, I thought about using it. But fear was a tightrope I walked daily. If Victor ever found out I had spoken to someone, the punishment would be more than bruises. It would be silence, permanent and irreversible. School had always been an escape for me, but returning now felt different. My classmates whispered, their eyes darting to the marks on my face despite the makeup I clumsily applied. Teachers asked questions I couldn't answer, their concern palpable but powerless. Mason, a boy from my literature class, approached me one afternoon, his voice low. "Are you okay, Aurora? You've been different." His kindness was like a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone lived in the same kind of darkness I did. I wanted to tell him everything, to let the truth spill out, but I couldn't risk it. So I forced a smile, said I was fine, and carried the weight of my silence back home. The truth was a burden only I seemed willing to carry. Victor's control wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He had a way of twisting reality, of making me question my own memory, my own sanity. "You exaggerate," he'd say. "You fall too easily. You bruise too quickly. You should be tougher." Each word was designed to erase the truth, to paint me as weak, hysterical, unreliable. My mother absorbed these lies, repeating them like scripture, until even I started to wonder if maybe it was me. But deep down, I knew the bruises didn't lie. The pain in my ribs didn't lie. The fear I felt every time the front door opened didn't lie. The monster in my house was real, no matter how much they tried to disguise him as a man. One evening, I slipped into the study while Victor was out. My heart pounded as I rifled through the drawers he always kept locked, but one had been left slightly ajar. Inside, I found envelopes stuffed with cash, documents with names I didn't recognize, and a ledger filled with numbers and codes that made no sense to me. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, the unease in my stomach growing heavier with each line I couldn't understand. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a man with anger issues. Victor was hiding something much bigger, something dangerous. I shoved the papers back, terrified he might return at any moment. But the discovery burned in my mind. My stepfather was not just abusive. He was hiding a life built on secrets. The tension in the house grew unbearable. Each day a game of pretending, each night a battle of survival. My mother seemed to sink deeper into her role as his accomplice, her eyes hollowing out, her laughter hollow, her love for me buried beneath her need to keep him happy. I tried to talk to her once, to beg her to see me, to protect me. "Mom, please," I whispered. "I can't do this anymore." She placed her hand on mine, but instead of comfort, her grip was firm, warning, "Don't make things worse, Aurora. Just keep quiet." Her words shattered me more than his fists ever could. If my own mother couldn't see me, who would? That night, I lay awake, the social worker's card burning like fire in my drawer. I traced the numbers with my finger, memorizing them, as though one day I might have the courage to dial. My body still ached, my spirit still fractured, but in the silence of the night, a thought echoed louder than fear. Secrets don't stay buried forever, and when they rise, they consume everything in their path. I didn't know yet what Victor was hiding. I didn't know how deep his lies went, but I knew this much. If I didn't find the courage to expose him, I wouldn't just lose myself, I'd lose everything. The days that followed felt like walking across thin ice, every step threatening to crack beneath me. Victor's presence loomed larger, heavier, as though he sensed that I had glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. He watched me differently now, his eyes sharp, calculating, as if measuring my loyalty with every glance. My mother, meanwhile, seemed caught in a haze, drifting through rooms with vacant eyes, her smiles mechanical, her laughter brittle. At school, I found myself drifting too, unable to concentrate. Every page of my notebook filled not with notes, but with scribbled words like escape, truth, survive. It was as though my life had become a performance, a fragile play where forgetting my lines could mean disaster. One evening, Victor cornered me in the kitchen. He didn't raise his hand this time. Instead, his weapon was his voice, low and venomous. "I know what you've been doing," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Sneaking, listening, snooping around where you don't belong." My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to deny it, to feign ignorance, but the smirk on his lips told me it wouldn't matter. He thrived on fear, and my silence was his proof. "Remember, Aurora," he whispered, his fingers brushing the counter like claws. Curiosity killed more than cats. His threat lingered in the air long after he left, and I sank to the floor, trembling. The next morning, I avoided his gaze completely, but my mother noticed my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes. She placed a plate of toast in front of me, her hand brushing mine, and for a brief moment, I thought she might ask if I was okay. Instead, she muttered, "You need to stop provoking him. You don't understand how hard he works for this family." Her words sliced through me like a knife. Provoking him? As if his fists and venomous words were punishments I had earned. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to beg her to remember that I was her daughter. But when I looked into her tired eyes, all I saw was resignation, a woman who had chosen her chains over freedom. At school, Mason noticed my silence growing heavier. During lunch, he nudged me gently, offering me his apple. "You don't eat anymore," he said softly, his eyes filled with a concern I had almost forgotten people were capable of. I forced a smile, took the apple, and thanked him. But his kindness made tears threaten to spill. For a fleeting second, I wondered if he could be someone I could trust, someone who might believe me. But the weight of Victor's threat pressed against my chest like an iron hand. If I told Mason and word reached Victor, the consequences would be unthinkable. So I buried my truth again, letting silence choke the words that so desperately wanted to escape. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the whispers I'd overheard between Victor and my mother. Their conversations weren't just about me anymore. There were mentions of deliveries, clients, and papers that couldn't fall into the wrong hands. I pieced together fragments, the way a child pieces a puzzle, except this puzzle painted a picture of something sinister. Was Victor involved in something illegal? Were the bruises and broken ribs just the surface of a much darker reality? My body shook under the blanket, not from the cold, but from the realization that this man wasn't just a monster in our home. He could be dangerous to far more than just me. And yet, my mother clung to him as if he were the only thing holding her together. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it brought nightmares. I dreamed of running through endless hallways with locked doors, Victor's voice echoing after me, my mother's laughter drifting like a ghost through the darkness. I always woke gasping, my sheets tangled around me like chains. Some nights, I pressed the social worker's card to my chest, whispering the numbers like a prayer, but dialing them felt impossible, like climbing a mountain with broken legs. What if they didn't believe me? What if they told my mother? What if Victor found out before they could save me? The fear was suffocating, and yet, beneath it all, a spark of determination flickered, fragile but alive. A week later, everything shifted. I came home from school to find the study door wide open, papers strewn across the desk. Victor wasn't home, and my mother was upstairs. My curiosity burned brighter than my fear, pulling me into the room. This time, I didn't just see ledgers and money. I saw contracts with names, shipments that hinted at illegal trade, and documents signed with Victor's bold handwriting. My breath caught when I spotted a photograph tucked between the papers. My mother, standing beside Victor, holding a suitcase of cash, her eyes empty, but complicit. My knees nearly buckled. This wasn't just his darkness. She was part of it. My mother wasn't a prisoner like me. She was his partner. I shoved everything back quickly, terrified they might return any second, but the truth seared itself into my mind. I could no longer cling to the hope that my mother might one day save me. She had already chosen her side, and that choice left me more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The only path left for me was to save myself, but the thought of standing against them both was terrifying. I was just a girl, and they were a fortress of lies, violence, and power. Yet as I closed the study door, one thought echoed louder than the rest. Secrets, once uncovered, demand to be told. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat by my window, staring at the stars, clutching the social worker's card in my hand. My body trembled, my heart ached, but my mind was clear for the first time in years. If I stayed silent, I would vanish within their lies. If I spoke, there was a chance, slim, fragile, but real, that I could break free. The decision weighed on me like a stone pressing against my chest. Dawn broke slowly, light spilling across my room, and I whispered to the rising sun, I can't be their secret anymore. The morning after that sleepless night felt like walking into a storm that only I could see. My mother hummed in the kitchen, as though life were normal, flipping pancakes, pretending the world was not built on secrets and bruises. Victor sat at the table reading his paper with the smug calmness of a man who believed he owned everything within reach, including us. Every sound felt amplified: the clink of his spoon in the coffee, the scrape of the knife against butter, the soft thud of my mother's slippers on the linoleum. My hands shook as I poured milk into my glass, spilling drops onto the table. Victor's eyes flicked up, sharp, cold, and for a second I thought he would erupt. But instead, he smirked, whispering, "Careful, Aurora. Clumsy hands can cause big accidents." My stomach clenched at the weight behind his words. At school, the world was just as loud, though in a different way. Mason found me in the hallway, catching my arm before I could retreat into another empty classroom. "You've been different," he said, his voice gentle but insistent. "I don't know what's happening, but you don't have to carry it alone." His words carved a hollow ache in my chest, a reminder of everything I wanted to say but couldn't. My lips parted, and for the briefest moment, I almost told him everything. The bruises, the threats, the papers hidden in the study, but fear clamped down like a vice. If I spoke, Victor's shadow would fall not only over me, but over Mason too. So I forced a smile and whispered, "I'm fine." The lie tasted bitter, and Mason's frown told me he didn't believe me. That afternoon, I lingered outside the house, standing at the gate, staring at the walls that caged me. My fingers toyed with the card from the social worker, its edges worn from my constant handling. I could call, I could run, but the thought of my mother's face, the way she looked at Victor, the way she chose him over me, kept me frozen. Would she deny me? Would she side with him against her own daughter? The weight of that question suffocated me. Finally, I walked inside, the air thick with the smell of Victor's cologne. He was home, waiting. He always seemed to know when I lingered too long, when I dared to imagine freedom. As I passed him in the hallway, he whispered, "Good girls don't keep secrets from their fathers." My blood ran cold. That night, I couldn't stop shaking. I sat on my bed with my knees pulled to my chest, my breathing uneven, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear my mother and Victor laughing downstairs, their voices mingling like some grotesque harmony. Each laugh was a nail, hammering in the truth. She wasn't trapped. She was with him. She chose this. And I was the one out of place, the intruder in their twisted kingdom. I wanted to scream, to smash every dish in the kitchen, to tear the house down around them. But instead, I buried my face in my hands and cried until my throat was raw. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. My mother's love would never save me. It was gone, buried beneath his shadow. The next day, a shift came. I overheard Victor speaking on the phone in the study, his voice sharp, impatient. "The shipment's delayed. Do you understand how much is at stake? If this falls apart, we're all finished." My pulse quickened as I pressed my ear against the door, straining to catch every word. He mentioned names, places, numbers, things I didn't fully understand, but enough to know it was illegal, dangerous. My chest tightened with the realization that Victor wasn't just a violent man behind closed doors. He was something worse, someone with power that stretched beyond our home, and my mother was woven into it all. When the call ended, I pulled back quickly, my breath shallow, my palms damp. Every secret I carried grew heavier, threatening to crush me. That evening, Mason called me. I almost didn't pick up, but something inside me craved the sound of someone who cared. His voice was steady, a lifeline in the chaos. "Aurora, I don't know what's happening, but I need you to trust me. You can tell me anything. You're not alone." Tears blurred my vision as I listened. I wanted to pour it all out, to let him shoulder even a fraction of this weight. But the image of Victor's face, his smirk, his threats, burned into my mind. My silence stretched too long, and Mason finally whispered, "When you're ready, I'll be here." The call ended, leaving me both comforted and hollow, trapped between the safety of secrets and the danger of truth. That night, I did something reckless. When the house grew silent, I crept back into the study. My hands trembled as I opened the drawers, flipping through papers, searching for the contracts I'd seen. They were still there, damning in their detail. Shipments, clients, accounts. And at the bottom, I found a ledger filled with initials and payments that made no sense. My stomach churned as I realized these weren't just shady deals. They were crimes, ones that could destroy lives. For a fleeting moment, I thought about taking one of the documents, slipping it into my backpack as proof, but the sound of footsteps above froze me. My courage shattered, and I shoved everything back, my heart hammering as I crept upstairs. The danger wasn't abstract anymore. It was real, and it was growing. Sleep was impossible. My dreams were a carousel of Victor's threats, my mother's vacant eyes, and Mason's voice asking me to trust him. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence between the creaks of the house. Each sound made me flinch. Every shadow felt alive. For the first time, I truly believed I might not survive this place. Not just the bruises, but the secrets, the lies, the suffocating silence. And yet, within that fear, something else burned. A spark of defiance. I couldn't stay caged forever. Something had to break. And when it did, I would either be free or destroyed. And as dawn crept in, I whispered to myself, a vow carved into my heart. If no one saves me, I'll save myself. The tension in the house grew like a storm cloud, pressing down on every corner until the walls seemed to breathe with menace. Victor had been short-tempered all week, snapping at the smallest things. My shoes left by the door, the way my mother salted the stew, the sound of me closing a drawer too quickly. His eyes lingered on me longer, sharp and searching, as if he suspected I had secrets buried beneath my skin. One night during dinner, I caught him staring at me with a strange stillness, fork poised in midair. "What did you hear yesterday?" he asked suddenly, his tone deceptively calm. My chest constricted, my fork clattering against my plate. My mother's head shot up, her eyes wide, but she said nothing. My lips parted, and I whispered, "Nothing." He smiled, slow and terrifying, and muttered, "Good girl." But I wasn't a good girl. Not in his world. That night, I dreamed of him dragging me into the shadows, his voice repeating those words over and over, until I woke with a scream lodged in my throat. My sheets clung to my damp skin, and I couldn't catch my breath. The air in the room felt suffocating, pressing against me until I thought my chest might cave in. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smirk, heard his threats, felt the danger crawling closer. I pressed my palms to my temples, rocking back and forth, desperate for the night to end. Outside my window, the trees swayed violently in the wind, their branches scratching against the glass like fingernails. It felt like the world itself was warning me, run, before it's too late. At school, I wore long sleeves to hide the newest marks, dark fingerprints blooming on my arms like rotten flowers. Victor had gripped me the night before when I walked too slowly up the stairs, his hand tightening until I whimpered. "Don't test me," he hissed, shoving me forward. I thought about telling Mason, about showing him the proof etched into my skin, but fear bound my tongue. If Victor found out, Mason would be in danger too. Still, Mason's eyes lingered on me, tracing the edges of my sleeves, his expression darkening with questions he didn't voice. He cornered me by the lockers, whispering, "Aurora, this isn't just about being tired or stressed. Something's wrong." My throat tightened as I muttered, "Please don't ask." His jaw clenched, but he nodded, his silence both a relief and a heartbreak. When I returned home, Victor was waiting in the living room, his phone in his hand, his gaze unblinking. "Sit," he ordered, and my legs moved before my brain caught up. The air smelled of his cologne, sharp and suffocating. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low but cutting. "I know you've been snooping. The study, the papers. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" My stomach dropped, my pulse thundering in my ears. I shook my head, words tumbling out in broken fragments. "Denials? Please?" He chuckled, a sound that made my blood run cold. "You're a terrible liar." He reached out suddenly, grabbing my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. "If you ever step foot in my office again, Aurora, you won't walk out." After he released me, I stumbled upstairs, my body trembling so violently I could barely grip the banister. My mother stood at the top, her face pale, her lips parted, as if she had heard everything. For a heartbeat, I thought she might reach for me, might protect me the way mothers are meant to. But she stepped aside instead, letting me pass without a word. The silence between us was louder than Victor's threats, louder than my own sobs muffled into my pillow later that night. That was when the truth crystallized in me like ice. My mother had chosen him, and she would keep choosing him, no matter what it cost me. The grief of that realization hurt worse than any bruise. The breaking point came 2 nights later. I was in my room when the door burst open, slamming against the wall with a force that made me jump. Victor stormed in, his face twisted with rage. "Who did you talk to?" he barked, his voice echoing off the walls. I stammered, my hands raised instinctively, but he didn't wait for answers. His hand struck my face, the sting blinding, my ears ringing from the force. I fell against the bed frame, my vision blurring as hot tears streamed down my cheeks. He loomed over me, his shadow swallowing the light. "Don't test me again," he snarled. Then, as suddenly as he came, he turned and left, slamming the door so hard the frame cracked. I lay on the floor, my body trembling, blood on my lip, the taste of iron reminding me I was still alive, barely. The next morning, my reflection in the bathroom mirror was unrecognizable. My cheek was swollen, my lips split, my eyes bruised from nights of tears and blows alike. I pressed cold water to my skin, watching as droplets slid down like rivers carving through broken land. A voice inside me screamed, "This is it. Enough. If you don't leave now, you'll never leave at all." My fingers reached for the card tucked into the bottom of my school bag, the number for the social worker. I held it so tightly the edges dug into my palm, leaving little crescents of pain. But I couldn't dial. Fear was still stronger than desperation. I folded it back carefully, ashamed of my own cowardice. The monster downstairs had broken my body, but not yet my will. Not completely. That day at school, Mason caught sight of the bruise on my face when my sleeve slipped back. His expression darkened, his jaw tightening with a fury I had never seen in him before. He grabbed my wrist, pulling me into an empty classroom, shutting the door. "Aurora," he whispered, his voice trembling with anger and fear. "Who did this to you?" My heart raced, the words sitting on the tip of my tongue, so close to spilling out. But Victor's voice echoed in my head. "If you ever tell." My silence stretched, suffocating. Mason's eyes glistened, his voice breaking. "You don't have to protect them. You don't have to protect anyone but yourself." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But when the bell rang, I slipped past him, leaving his words hanging heavy in the air. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the stars, wondering if somewhere out there freedom existed for girls like me. My cheek still burned, my body ached, but it was my heart that hurt the most. I thought of Mason's eyes, filled with a love he couldn't yet name, a love that might save me if I let it. And I thought of my mother, whose silence screamed louder than any betrayal. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the ending was coming. Something had to give. Either I would find the strength to break free, or Victor would finish what he had started. And when the floorboards creaked outside my room, I held my breath, clutching the card in my hand, whispering to myself the only prayer I had left. "Please, let me survive this." The bruise on my face was impossible to hide, no matter how much makeup I layered on, no matter how carefully I angled my hair. At school, whispers followed me like shadows, each voice cutting into me with suspicion and pity. Mason didn't whisper. He demanded answers with his eyes, his jaw set in quiet fury. Every time I avoided him, guilt gnawed at me, a hollow ache in my chest that grew heavier with each lie I told. By the third day, his patience broke. He cornered me outside after class, his hand gripping my backpack strap. "You don't get to walk away from me anymore, Aurora. Not like this." His words pierced me, but fear clamped my mouth shut. I turned my face away, tears threatening, and whispered, "Please don't make me say it." His shoulders slumped, but he didn't let go of me. That night, the house seemed quieter than usual, as though it were holding its breath. My mother cooked in the kitchen, her movements sharp and rushed, while Victor paced in the study. His footsteps echoed through the halls like a predator circling its prey. I sat in my room with the card clutched in my hand again, the numbers burning into my palm. I wanted to call, to hear a voice on the other side promising me escape, but I pictured Victor's rage if he ever found out, and my fingers froze. Suddenly, the phone slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a loud crack. Panic flooded me. I scrambled to pick it up before the noise drew attention, heart hammering as though I had already been caught. The silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm. It was only a matter of time before Mason decided to act without me. The following morning, he appeared outside my house. My stomach dropped when I saw him leaning against the fence, his eyes fixed on the front door with grim determination. He shouldn't have been there, not in Victor's territory. I hurried outside before Victor noticed, my voice frantic. "What are you doing here? You need to leave. Now." Mason's gaze swept over me, lingering on the bruise still fading on my cheek. His fists clenched, his voice low. I can't just stand by anymore, Aurora. I know it's him. You don't have to say it. I know. My throat closed, fear and relief crashing together in a violent wave. I shook my head desperately. Please, Mason. If he sees you... But it was too late. The front door creaked open. Victor stood in the doorway, his silhouette filling the frame, his expression unreadable. "Friend of yours?" he asked, his tone light but edged with danger. My blood ran cold. Mason squared his shoulders, glaring back with a defiance that terrified me. "Yeah, I'm her friend," Mason said firmly, his voice unwavering. The air between them grew sharp, thick with unspoken threats. Victor's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, isn't that sweet? Friends are important, as long as they know their place." My knees nearly buckled, dread flooding me. I grabbed Mason's arm, tugging him back. "We have to go," I whispered, dragging him toward the street. Mason let me pull him, but his eyes never left Victor's until we turned the corner, the weight of that stare lingering like a noose around my neck. When Mason finally spoke again, his voice was quiet, but firm. "He's going to kill you if you stay." The words cracked something inside me, because deep down, I already knew it. I stared at the ground, my hands trembling, unable to deny the truth. "I can't just leave," I whispered. "He'll hurt her. He'll hurt my mom." Mason's voice grew tight with emotion, anger simmering beneath his grief. "She's not protecting you, Aurora. She's protecting him. You're alone in that house." The cruelty of his words cut deep, but they were honest. More honest than anything I had let myself face. Tears blurred my vision, the world spinning. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to vanish, but instead, I clenched my fists and muttered, "I'll figure it out." Mason shook his head, his hand brushing mine, lingering. "Promise me you won't wait too long." Later that night, the storm finally came. Rain battered the windows, the wind howling like some wounded animal outside. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the door slammed open. Victor stood there, drunk, his shirt half unbuttoned, his eyes bloodshot. "What were you and that boy talking about?" he demanded, stumbling into the room. My stomach clenched, terror paralyzing me. "Nothing," I whispered, my voice shaking. He laughed bitterly, advancing. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't see the way he looks at you? The way you sneak off?" His hand shot out, gripping my arm so tightly I cried out. "You belong in this house," he hissed, his breath hot and foul. "Don't forget it." He shoved me onto the bed and left, the door slamming so hard the walls trembled. I lay there, shaking uncontrollably, my skin burning where his hand had been. The next morning, I could barely move. My arm throbbed, dark bruises already blooming across the skin. I wrapped it with a scarf, hiding the evidence, but the pain wouldn't be silenced. My mother glanced at me during breakfast, her eyes flicking to the scarf, then away again. She said nothing, chewing mechanically, her silence a wound deeper than the bruises. Victor read the paper as though nothing had happened, sipping his coffee, the picture of control. I wanted to scream, to throw the cup across the room, to force her to see me. Instead, I sat quietly, swallowing mouthfuls of food I couldn't taste. Inside, a voice screamed, "This isn't survival anymore. This is dying slowly." The thought terrified me more than Victor ever could. At school, Mason caught my arm accidentally, and I flinched so violently that the scarf slipped, revealing the bruises beneath. His eyes widened, fury igniting instantly. "Aurora," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage and heartbreak. "He did this, didn't he?" My throat tightened, my lips trembling, but I couldn't form the words. The silence stretched, my tears spilling over. Mason's fists clenched, his whole body shaking. "I swear, if you don't go to the police, I will." Panic seized me. "No!" I cried, clutching his sleeve desperately. "You can't. He'll kill us." Mason's eyes locked onto mine, fierce and unrelenting. "Then let him try, because I'm not standing by while he destroys you." His words carved into me like fire, igniting something buried deep inside, something stronger than fear. That night, I lay awake staring at the card again, the social worker's number burning in my hand. Mason's words echoed in my head, battling Victor's threats. One promised freedom, the other promised death. My body shook with the weight of the decision pressing down on me. If I stayed silent, I knew the ending. I could see it written in the bruises, in the blood I had already shed. If I spoke, I risked everything. But maybe, just maybe, I could escape. I pressed the card to my chest, tears streaming silently down my face. My lips formed the words I had been too afraid to speak. I can't do this alone anymore. And for the first time, I believed it. The house felt like a ticking bomb, the air charged with dread. Victor's gaze lingered too long, his smirk sharper than words, while my mother drifted silently, her avoidance a wound of its own. I began sleeping with shoes on, phone under my pillow, bracing for escape. Every sound, every shadow, felt like a countdown. Something was coming, and I knew it would be violent. Mason refused to leave me, gripping my hand in the library with a determination that scared me. "He's already winning," he said, his eyes fierce. "The only way he loses is if you stand up." Why? His words burned into me. They were true, but truth terrified me more than lies, because I wasn't ready to face it. That night, thunder rattled the windows as Victor's storm erupted inside. Drunk and muttering, he smashed a bottle, shards scattering like sparks. When his eyes found mine on the stairs, his grin twisted. "Why are you hiding, Aurora? Come join the family." His steps shook the house as he climbed toward me. My body locked. My mother begged weakly from below, but he ignored her, seizing my wrist with crushing force. "Stay away from that boy," he hissed, "or you'll both pay." My mother's silence cracked. "Stop! You're hurting her!" she cried. But Victor only shoved me aside and dragged her into the kitchen. She screamed as I chased after, only to see him slam her against the counter. His eyes turned on me, dark with intent. This wasn't control anymore. It was destruction. When he lunged, I screamed louder than I ever had, a scream that shook him, if only for a second. Then his strike came, hard and blinding, blood filling my mouth as I hit the floor. My mother wailed, but he shoved her back, crawling. My fingers found a shard of glass. It cut into my palm, blood dripping, but I hid it, whispering to myself, "Not anymore." My body shook, but the spark to fight was alive. And then, the pounding, fists on the front door, voices shouting, "Police! Open the door!" Time froze. Victor stiffened, his grip faltering as thunder cracked outside. My mother's sobs stilled, her wide eyes locked on the door. I sat on the floor, bloodied shard in my hand, torn between relief and terror. The storm had broken, but were they in time? The pounding on the door echoed like thunder inside my chest, louder even than the storm raging outside. For one suspended moment, everything froze. Victor's face twisted between rage and fear. My mother's sobs cut into silence, and the shard of glass trembled in my bleeding hand. The police voices carried again. "Open the door! This is the police!" Their presence cracked the spell of terror that had ruled this house for years. Relief surged through me, but it was fragile, fleeting, because I knew Victor wasn't the kind of man to surrender. He was the kind who fought to the last, who would rather destroy everything than lose control. And in that instant, I realized we were standing on the edge of something final. Victor's hand clenched into a fist as he turned from the door and back to me. "You called them," he snarled, his voice low and venomous, though I hadn't. I shook my head desperately, my throat too raw to form words. He didn't care. His eyes were wild, darting between me, my mother, and the door shaking under the pounding fists. The storm outside screamed with the wind, rattling the glass panes. Inside, a different storm brewed, Victor's fury rising like a tidal wave. "You think they'll save you?" he spat, pointing at me. "They can't save you. No one can." My mother crawled across the floor toward me, her face pale, eyes swollen with tears. "Victor, please," she whispered, her voice broken, pleading not with a husband but with a monster. But he wasn't listening anymore. His whole body seemed wound tight like a predator about to strike. When the police shouted again, warning they would break down the door, Victor lunged. He didn't go for the door. He went for me. Time slowed. His weight crashed down as I stumbled back, the shard cutting deeper into my palm. He pinned me, his breath sour with alcohol, his hand clamping my throat. My lungs screamed for air. My mother's voice shattered the air as she threw herself at him, clawing and pulling, but he tossed her aside as though she were nothing. My vision darkened, spots swimming before my eyes. Panic surged, but so did something else. The spark I had felt before, the vow I had whispered. Not anymore, I had promised. The shard burned in my hand like fire, and with the last of my strength, I swung. A cry tore from Victor's throat as the jagged glass ripped across his arm. His grip loosened, and I sucked in a ragged breath, coughing violently. He reeled back, blood dripping down his sleeve, his face contorted in shock and rage. For the first time, I had hurt him. For the first time, the balance shifted. My mother scrambled to me, pulling me toward the corner as Victor staggered, fury blazing in his eyes. He roared like an animal charging again, but this time, the door exploded inward. The police stormed inside, guns drawn, voices sharp and commanding. "Drop it! Step back!" they shouted, their beams of light slicing through the chaos. Victor froze, chest heaving, blood dripping onto the floorboards. His eyes flicked from me to my mother, to the officers, and then, with terrifying calm, he raised his hands, not in surrender, but in mockery. "This is my house," he snarled. "You don't get to tell me what to do." The next seconds were chaos. He lunged again, not at the police, but at me, as though destroying me was the only victory left to him. Shots rang out, sharp, deafening cracks that split the air apart. My scream tangled with my mother's as Victor staggered mid-step, his body jerking, before collapsing hard onto the floor. Silence followed, so absolute it rang in my ears. Only the storm outside dared to continue. I sat frozen, my body trembling violently, the shard slipping from my bloody hand. My mother clutched me, sobbing into my hair, as the police swarmed the room. One officer knelt, checking Victor's pulse, then exchanged a grim nod with another. The monster who had haunted my nights, broken my body, twisted my life into fear, was gone, just like that. But there was no relief in me, only a hollow ache, an emptiness I couldn't name. The officers guided us out into the rain, their words muffled, as though I were underwater. Flashing lights painted the night in red and blue, neighbors gathering with wide eyes. My mother wrapped a blanket around me, her hands shaking. "It's over," she whispered, rocking me as though I were a child again. But as I stared at the gurney being wheeled out, Victor's lifeless body beneath the sheet, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet, because the scars he left weren't just on my skin. They were carved deep inside, and healing them would be its own war. In the days that followed, the house became a crime scene, sealed with tape. We stayed in a shelter, the walls plain but safe, the first safe walls I had ever known. Mason came to me, his face pale with fear and love, his arms steady around me. I cried into his chest, the words spilling out, the truth I had hidden for so long. And for the first time, I wasn't silenced. My voice shook, but it was mine. Each word was a piece of the weight lifting, even as the grief sat heavy. My mother, too, began to speak. She admitted what she had buried for years, her shame, her fear, her complicity. She apologized through tears I had longed to see, and though forgiveness was distant, the fact that she spoke at all was a start. The world outside wanted headlines, wanted to paint us as victims in a story of tragedy. But I wasn't just a victim. I had fought. I had screamed. I had survived. That truth was messy, bloody, complicated, but it was mine. And though the nightmares still came, though the memory of his hand at my throat still jolted me awake, I began to see something beyond the pain. Possibility. The last night before we left the shelter, I stood by the window, the storm clouds finally clearing, stars breaking through. I thought about the girl who had whispered, "Not anymore," with a shard of glass in her hand. That girl had been terrified, broken, on the edge of collapse, but she had also been brave. Brave enough to survive, to scream, to fight back, brave enough to begin again. And as the quiet night wrapped around me, I whispered it once more, not as a vow, but as a truth. Not anymore, because the storm had broken. And even though rebuilding would take years, even though the scars would never fully fade, I was still standing, and I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. If this story touched you, if Aurora's fight for survival and courage in the face of horror moved you, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that goes deep into the struggles, secrets, and shocking truths hidden behind closed doors. By subscribing, you become part of a community that believes in giving voice to the silenced, exposing the darkness, and celebrating survival. Every story has power, and together, we can make sure no one feels alone in theirs. Hit subscribe now, and stay with us for the next journey.